Alright you guys, today we are yet again unpacking NASA's dodgy baggage and rummaging through the agency's dirty laundry to uncover the many spills, stains, and soils that not even a Tide stick would be able to get out. Not sponsored. Starting us off today, we are diving headfirst into a pretty messed up cover-up that took place back in 1986. You guys might remember me briefly mentioning the Challenger incident in part 1 while discussing the Columbia disaster, but today I wanted to dig a little bit deeper. On January 28th of 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger was all ready to go, manned by 7 astronauts including Krista McAuliffe, who had joined the mission as part of a Teachers in Space project, with the hopes of streaming educational lessons from space in the interest of re-sparking children's love of learning. Everyone stood and stared as the historic spacecraft left the ground, but no more than 75 seconds after takeoff, the spacecraft exploded and disintegrated 46,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, ending the lives of all 7 members on board. After the incident, NASA released an initial report saying that while they were unsure of what caused the accident, the cabin crew had most certainly been unconscious at the time of the explosion due to the cabin's pressure. Unfortunately for the astronauts, this initial report was later proved to be no more than a cover-up attempt, as it was later revealed that the crew were most likely fully awake and possibly fully aware of the fact that the explosion was about to take place as well. Furthermore, the Rogers Commission also outed NASA, revealing that the space agency had not taken proper safety precautions prior to the mission and even failed to receive an engineer's stamp of approval declaring the spacecraft flight ready. Next on our list today, we have the somewhat unorthodox procedures NASA coaches its astronauts to use should an individual experience some kind of mental break while in space, commonly referred to as space madness. When an astronaut or cosmonaut begins to act up during a mission or stay on the ISS, other astronauts on board are instructed to immobilize and bind the hands and feet with duct tape and then tie the affected down with a bungee cord and inject them with a tranquilizer so that no harm may come to the spacecraft or anyone on board. It might seem pretty extreme, but these precautions are also super necessary as even small injuries can become a pretty big deal in space. Plus, if an unhinged astronaut decided to mess with the ship's oxygen systems or open one of the pressure-controlled airtight hatches, they would end up killing everyone on board almost instantly, causing millions of dollars in damage and further damaging NASA's already fairly fragile reputation. While astronauts are highly vetted and their mental state repeatedly evaluated before ever stepping foot outside of our atmosphere, many mental health problems faced by returning astronauts are what pushed the space agency to create the plan of action just in case such an incident were to occur up in the sky. Next on our list, we have the Space Strike, an incident that occurred in 1973 in which 3 astronauts held over $22 million worth of equipment hostage aboard the Skylab, valued at $2.2 billion US. After NASA refused to acknowledge their overworked employees' cries to implement a more sustainable work schedule. While all 3 of the men aboard the craft were first-time astronauts, the rigorous schedule that barely left time for bathroom breaks would most definitely take its toll on even the most experienced of spacefarers. On the 12-week, 84-day mission, every member of the crew was expected to work 16-hour days every day until they were scheduled to return to Earth. A radio message sent down to Mission Control by astronaut Gerald Carr stated that we would never work 16 hours a day for 84 days straight on the ground, and we should not be expected to do it here in space. In another message, Carr urged his superiors at the agency to allow the crew time to rest and get their minds and bodies under control. To this, Mission Control responded, telling the crew to continue working as instructed, which apparently was the last straw for the astronauts of Skylab 4, who, upon receiving the message from the ground, turned off all communication aboard the spacecraft. The radio silence lasted a full day, during which the astronauts took time to rest and work on mission projects of interest. When communication between the astronauts and the ground resumed, it seems NASA was in much more of a listening mood, and negotiations began to ensure both the needs of the mission and the astronauts would be met for the remainder of the men's time in space. Next up, we have an incident involving a love triangle between astronauts William, Lisa, and Colleen, which resulted in some pretty erratic on-the-ground behavior. Remember when I mentioned that the come down from space is sometimes much more than just a descent back into our atmosphere? Well, it seems that was definitely the case for Lisa Nowak after sparking up and burning down a very short-lived relationship with William during her 2006 space mission. After the two made it home safe, they went through a hostile parting of ways, and Williams was quick took to re-enter the dating scene, moving on to yet another woman in uniform, Air Force Captain Colleen Shipman. When Lisa found out about Williams' new woman, she decided to confront her, driving 900 miles across the country from Houston to Orlando, wearing adult diapers so that no time would be wasted on frivolous pit stops along the way. When Lisa arrived at her destination, she pepper sprayed Colleen before being arrested. Lisa was later charged with attempting to end Colleen's life, as well as attempted abduction. While the disgraced and scorned lover maintains that she had only wanted to intimidate Colleen, the contents of her vehicle, which included latex gloves, rubber tubing, a hammer, a butcher's blade, a serrated buck blade, and many large plastic bags, told otherwise. Unfortunately for a very frightened Colleen, the evidence didn't stick, and Lisa was only sentenced to 2 days in jail and a year of probation after pleading guilty to felony burglary and a misdemeanor. We're gonna lighten things up at our halfway point today. Well, kind of. Actually, this isn't really light, it's kind of disgusting, but I guess that's what we're here for. In part 1 of this mini-series, we discussed how astronauts survive in space drinking their own pee, and that was very gross. Well, I'm gonna take it a step further and fill you in on some new scientific advancements being made that will allow astronauts to consume what I morally cannot refer to as food, created by processing their own feces. That's right, this is really happening, and somehow it's my job to share it with you. Before you decide to click away, allow me to clarify something right off the bat. No, astronauts will not be directly consuming their solid waste, but rather the astronauts' food will be consuming the methane produced by the astronauts' feces instead. You see, scientists have recently discovered a number of bacteria species that can be grown into edible and nutritious substances. But in order for the bacteria to reach this state, methane must be introduced into its airtight environment. Methane, which is not so easily sourced in space. And so naturally, scientists thought, hey, here's an idea, and whipped up a waste processor that can turn shite into methane diamonds in just 13 hours flat. Nice. Alright, let's move on. You know what's not great for NASA's reputation? Having their astronauts accused of sabotaging their Russian counterparts while aboard the ISS. Like, it's really bad. The incident took place in 2018 after NASA's ground control had detected significant changes in the air pressure on the ISS, which was then traced back to a 2mm wide drill hole in Russia's Soyuz spacecraft docked on the ISS. Successful efforts were quickly made to seal the hole, clearly made by an electrical tool, but of course Russia's space agency was not happy, and even threatened legal action against Serena Chancellor, who they accused of creating the breach. In the end, nothing came of the lawsuit and the cause of the hole was never determined, but with growing animosity between the US and Russian space agencies, along with the aging of the ISS, it is quite possible and highly likely that we will see Russia slowly phasing out its involvement with the space station and perhaps abandoning the project completely by as early as 2025. Next up, we have yet another PR nightmare that occurred when Harriet, former wife of Apollo 7 command pilot Dawn, filed for divorce. That day, Dawn made history twice, being not only one of the first members to make it into space after the Apollo 1 disaster, but also the first person to ever be served divorce papers while in space. While NASA has had its fair share of hound dog astronauts enjoying the company of multiple companions at one time, Dawn made headlines after his wife finally decided she'd had enough of the spaceman's infidelity on Earth. According to reports, when Harriet had first confronted Dawn about his extramarital activities, he responded saying that she was crazy. Harriet's rebuttal? Visit a psychiatrist. But Dawn pleaded with her, saying that if she did that, he would surely lose his job. And so, in 1968, she saw a lawyer instead and initiated the divorce while her husband orbited around the Earth for just shy of 11 days. This next one is for my extraterrestrial enthusiasts. Don't worry, I didn't forget about you guys. Every NASA video needs at least one point that backs public claims that NASA is not only actively aware of, but is also actively hiding the presence of UFOs, UAPs, and even aliens. So for today's list, we're going to be looking at NASA's track record of cutting the video feed on live streams captured on a webcam attached to the ISS. While they have been known to have done this on multiple occasions, one instance occurring on July 9th of 2016 has garnered much popularity amongst the extraterrestrial enthusiast community. During the live stream, a bright object became clearly visible, floating into view, and then sitting still in the top right-hand corner of the screen. Moments later, before any real observations could be made, the screen flashed a standardized message claiming that the service was experiencing technical difficulties. While that might well have been the case, the timing, along with the fact that this has happened before, definitely raised some suspicion. So let me know what you guys think. Was it really a technical difficulty, or is NASA once again keeping secrets? Next up, we have 19 years of fraudulent business that led to many malfunctions, including the failed launches of NASA's Orbiting Carbon Observatory and both the 2009 and 2011 Glory missions. Along with these failures, millions of dollars were sent right down the drain, all due to faulty aluminum that had been supplied to the company by Safa Profiles Inc., now Hydro Extrusions Portland Inc., for 19 years before the material's integrity was called into question. It eventually came to light that the company had falsified thousands of documents pertaining to the materials, changing test results and providing clients with misleading certifications. Along with being held liable for $42 million worth of damage during the 19 years in which they participated in fraudulent business practices, Safa was hit with criminal and was even suspended from doing business with the United States government from 2015 all the way to 2019 when the company came under new management. And finally, to finish this off today, we have the cosmic Souvenirs scandal, which took place in July of 1971. Before setting off on the Apollo 15 mission, astronauts David Scott, Alfred Worden, and James Irwin made a deal with a German stamp dealer that in exchange for $7,000 each, the three men would bring 100 envelopes each with stamps and postmarks to the lunar surface of the moon, so that they may later be sold for a profit. The men agreed under the condition that the postal covers not be sold until after the Apollo missions had ended. In fact, they even brought extra covers to keep for themselves as well. In total, somewhere between 400 to 600 envelopes were brought along on the mission. When the men returned to Earth and handed over the stamp dealer's share of the envelopes, he went immediately back on his word to wait for the missions to end and began selling the memorabilia straight away. Some of the postcards even sold for thousands of dollars that year. And mind you, this was all the way back in the early 1970s, so $1,000 back then would be worth over $7,500 today. Eventually, NASA found out what the men had done and that they had failed to declare the envelopes in their mission log. It was determined that while the astronauts had violated regulations, there was no evidence of any real criminal intent, but they were severely reprimanded and punished, with NASA removing all three men from flight status for any future missions with the agency. A couple hundred postcards at the cost of never being able to set foot in space again? I don't know, you guys. Do you think it was worth it? Alright, you guys, we've done it again, and I feel like we've gotten a bit closer in the process too. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I've been your host, Hannah Thompson, and I look forward to seeing you in our next video.